Okay, so something I could not offer to you was a visit with the president of Ukraine. Luckily, I happen to know my guest today. He is the anchor of ABC's World News Tonight. David Muir has been on our show many times. He's a dear friend. He's a lovely person. But I love that he wants to allow us to share with you some of his meeting with Volodymyr Zelenskyy in Kyiv. Prez Z with my buddy. Here's a clip.
They occupied our nuclear station, 6 blocks, the biggest in the Europe. It means 6 Chernobyls. It means the biggest danger in the Europe. So they occupied it. So that means that they use nuclear weapon. That is nuclear weapon.
You have been warning of nuclear catastrophe for quite some time. As we've been here, nuclear inspectors have finally made it to Zaporizhia through the war zone, the front lines. The lead inspector came out afterward and said, "I'm worried."
Please welcome back to our show, our friend, David Muir. Hi, my love. How are
Hey,
you?
Rachel. I know this is a commitment we share, actually, just sharing with our audience what is happening, a world away in Ukraine, and to the people, the families of Ukraine. And I'm so grateful to be on with you and to also talk with the audience a little bit about what we both have done. I know you've been 3 times now.
3 times. It is your business to be there. I've never been. I go to Lviv and the surrounding area there, but you are always in the heart of these things. And I wish I could sit with this president. I feel very Ukrainian, I have to say. I spend so much time with these people, and it strikes me that people of every age, grandmothers to little children, are so committed to each other and to democracy. That's why I go. I imagine it's difficult for you as a journalist to separate personal feelings. I mean, they draw you so much into their hearts and souls and lives. How difficult is that to separate journalist from human,
Well, I think that's a really good question, Rachel. And we've been to the region a number of times now. And you mentioned the interview, and I'll give you a little behind the scenes to that interview in just a second, because I think you're asking a more sort of human question about basic connection that we have for others, certainly others who are going through something as horrible as they're going through in Ukraine. And, in my first couple of reporting trips to the region, we interviewed so many mothers and their children leaving the country, not knowing what the future holds for them. And as you know, men of a certain age aren't allowed to leave the country because they're fighting the Russians.
They're fighting.
They have no choice. And so you have mothers and their young children. And you remember in those early weeks leaving on buses and going over the border with Poland. It's extraordinary to think that we're seeing images like these in 2022. I mean, it looks like it's out of a World War II era, newsreel or a movie depicting World War II, and yet it's playing out right now. And I so many of these mothers, ask them questions about the bravery, right? And what do they tell their children? And they tell their children will be home soon. You'll be back with, dad and the rest of their extended family and back to school. And then the mothers are looking at me without even saying a word. You can almost read their facial expression when they really don't know what the future holds for them and their children.
You can read a thought bubble, right? Exactly.
No question. And then, of course, the bravery of those who've stayed behind to fight for their country. And you showed that clip from President Zelenskyy. He was talking about the nuclear power plant there in Ukraine, which to this day remains one of their largest concerns. The fighting continues around that plant. It's the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. And he believes that Russia is most definitely using it as a nuclear weapon now. Obviously, because they've surrounded the plant, they control the plant itself. And Ukrainian workers who were forced to work inside that plant with Russian soldiers, armed Russian soldiers, But the president's interesting, Rachel. I asked him, and he doesn't do many interviews talking about family. And this was the walk through the presidential office building right here. So you went to Lviv, which is several hours over the border with Poland. It's hard enough to get to Lviv. We flew into Warsaw, drove down to the border, waited at security, then drove into Lviv. That was a 6 to 7 hour journey just to get to Lviv, and then we did the next 6 to 7 hours to Kyiv. And once we got to Kyiv, obviously the presidential office building is surrounded by several layers of security, armed guards, checked, at each sort of gate that we went through. And then we went into the presidential office building. The power is largely out. Very few lights are on. And in every corner, every hallway, every doorway is an armed Ukrainian guard with a gun sort of, over their chest. And you're reminded that they're protecting, their leader. And President Zelenskyy, when I sat across from him, I said, "Are you a target?" And he said, "I'm target number one." And he's fully aware of that. And he said of his family, his wife and his 2 children, that he only sees them now about once a month. And they've decided to stay in Kyiv, but they move them often to keep them
like a safe
out
house.
of harm's way.
Exactly. They're always moving because they are moving targets. It's extraordinary when you see the strength of the children and the mothers. I love that you're speaking about that and the time that you spent with the orphans and the injured and the young. The strength of these people is pervasive at every age and every level. It is such an extraordinary feat of all of these folks. They are the strongest people I have ever known. They are so tough and resilient and brave. And they're doing this for all of us. That's what I don't want us to forget as a country. We're all fighting about whether or not to continue or how much we will continue our aid to these people. It is so imperative to all of us that believe in freedom, that believe in Madisonian democracy. It is imperative to all of us that we protect and love and remember and do what we can for these folks. Can you speak to your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that, we're in a country right now, and Rachel, you don't need me to remind you of this. You and I have had this discussion many times over the years during my visits to the show and our conversations, even beyond the show, that we live in a country with deeply polarized political beliefs. And I often say that, the way people are defined at one end of the spectrum or the other is not necessarily, in fact, I don't believe it's the reality of what we actually are in this country.
I don't think it's true at all.
Don't you agree that we have much more in common than we have that separates us? There's no question about that. And that's sort of what you and I always talk about with our America Strong segments and our Made in America segments. And I think that what's happening in Ukraine, if at the very least, they are fighting for a very fragile democracy. And I think that in watching their fight and in the West rallying around Ukraine, it's a reminder to all of us back here at home that these tests are still part of the year 2022. We all think about it as distant history. And when you see what's happening to these families, we're reminded of how privileged we are that we have still a functioning democracy that's been tested in and of itself in these last couple of years. But we can't take it for granted because those families absolutely aren't taking it for granted. Their lives are on the line. Their fathers, their grandfathers, they're waiting to see if they'll get their country back in the same shape and form as the country they left with their children. So I think it's a powerful reminder, as we all gather around for the holiday with our own loved ones, or the people who are dear to us, just to remember the people who are fighting just for a piece of the freedom and the democracy that we have.
It reminds us all to be so mindful of how much we have to be grateful for and how much we should all be loving each other instead of fighting with each other. David, I love you so much. I appreciate you taking the time. You're so busy. Maybe I'll see you in Ukraine, but I hope to see you soon in person.
In person.
It's hard to be away from you. I always just want to hug you. It's hard not to be with you in person.
Well, please, let's make that happen soon. And I applaud, I want everyone to know, watching your program, of the work that you do behind the scenes. I know that you don't talk about it often, but these trips to Ukraine, what you do for animals in our country, what you do for Made in America, what you do to make sure that people remember the humanity that we do have more that connects us than divides us. Those are all the things. That's what keeps me coming back to your show.
Platform. And that's what I love about you, is that you share good news with people and you keep their hope alive. You keep them informed, most importantly, but you keep their hope alive. And that's what I've always loved about your work. It's great work. I congratulate you in every way, my friend. I'm twitching. I'm so emotional about everything I'm saying. Of course, you guys watch World News Tonight already. But World News Tonight with David Muir, check your listing for your time. But it's ABC every night, and he's already on the top of that cake. You are the cherry on my Sunday, my friend. I love you. I love you.
A real hug soon, Rachel. Love you too. Have the best holiday. Be safe.
Happy holidays, my friend.